Okay, so you got a notification that says Youri's recording the call?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right, here it goes. Well, hello everyone. All right, hello everyone. Welcome to another edition of 1+1, your place for inconvenient truth-telling and myth-busting. And this is our Native/Indigenous Lives Matter episode. And what a great day to be recording this episode, long in the making, because it's International Day of the World's Indigenous People. And the theme this year is the role of Indigenous women in the preservation and transmission of traditional knowledge. So, who better to have on than our returning champion, which is Mrs. Nakuset, who is the executive director of the Native Women's Shelter of Montreal in Quebec, Canada. And yeah, so we're going to be talking, all things, all things Indigenous people, all things Canada. So first off, Mrs. Nakuset, thank you so much for coming on today, especially coming on such short notice. I really appreciate that.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
It's, by the way, it's a real honor to have you back. And and like I said, thank you for coming on such short notice. And yeah, let's get into the topic. So firstly, Mrs. Nakuset, can you give us any updates on the Wet'suwet'en resistance against climate destructive water polluting pipelines, which later the Indigenous community has to pay the price for losing clean drinking water, which is already scarce in this apartheid system, and of course, no compensation or even getting electricity or all the pluses that white biracial Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and the U.S. take for granted? Yeah, that's my first question to you.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't really have any updates because that's not really in the field that I work in. I work in the city. And I'm working to support, Indigenous people that are homeless through the Native Women's Shelter, as well as those that are on the streets that use Resilience Montreal, and creating programming. So that's really what my focus is. So unfortunately, can't answer your question. Please get in touch with Ellen Gabriel. She will
do.
She'll be able to share more insight on that subject, but sorry. And it's just Nakuset, it's not Mrs. It's just by the way.
Okay. Well, all right. No problem. But if you have been in touch with anyone from the Wet'suwet'en resistance, what have they been saying which could be of interest to to our audience?
Yeah, got the wrong person on for this. I'm telling you, I don't have any information. All I know is I was asked to speak, I guess probably in February or March at something. And then when it was at the same time when the war happened in Ukraine, and all these people showed up to do a rally for that, and we got sort of pushed out. That is it.
Well. Funny enough, I know that there were, this is what's ingenious about the Canadian imperialist system, is I know that like Canada got some Indigenous people to, wave Ukrainian flags, saying that they, and that just got me so angry because it's like, ooh, if you only knew what Canada, what Canada was really up to in Ukraine, you would not be waving those Ukrainian flags. But that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day, which we're not going to get into. But of course, if people want to find out what's the latest going on with the Wet'suwet'en protest, they should definitely contact, I believe, Skylar Williams. Pamela Palmater, and I actually recently did an interview with Damien Gagon on what's going on with the Wet'suwet'en people. But then I have to ask, so that's a perfect segue to this question, because you are based in Quebec, and so I have to ask you this. I was stunned to find out that the Quebec hospital, where staffers and nurses treated an Indigenous patient woman, like an alcoholic, drug addict that doesn't deserve our compassion. They were filmed mocking this patient, treating this dying patient with utter contempt, and this sparked protests across the province and nationwide. And I believe an investigation found that the hospital was guilty of institutional racism, and yet the nurse accused and others who were on tape of being the racist, cackling witches they got to keep their job still. What's your reflection on this?
Well, it's not surprising, right? I mean, as Indigenous people, we rarely get justice. When Joyce Echaquan, passed away, it was, in Montreal, we had a rally that brought in probably easily 5,000 people and brought in speakers from all over to sort of share their outrage. Because I think that you have to sometimes just take all that anger and turn it into something positive. But, when people who are guilty are then reinstated, that's a slap in the face, right? And I'm not exactly sure, what we learn from this later on is that it's okay to mistreat Indigenous people. And I think that, I believe today is also the anniversary of Colton Bushi, right? This is someone.
Explain who he is. Explain who he is as well.
He an Indigenous young man that was driving, with some friends and pulled onto someone's property by mistake, and in the process was shot in the head. And the person who shot him did go to court and was not considered guilty because it was his property. It was his land. They said that they had tried to break in or something. I'm not exactly sure.
And didn't that person, because my friend Eve Angler, I believe he wrote an article about this, and didn't that person say, well, I was just using my instincts as a soldier when this person came on my property? Is that the same incident?
Yeah, I mean, it is, right? But the thing is that there are so many, it almost feels as an Indigenous person that we're targets no matter where we go. Yeah. And that, I mean, even with, I have a poster over there with, Chantal Moore, who when her family was concerned, called the police for a wellness check, and then they murdered her. So, if we're having issues with not trusting police, and that's never fixed, then what happens when we're in a crisis? If I need to go to a hospital, do I want to go to a hospital? Because we know what happened to Joyce Echaquan. These things are, and maybe we shouldn't be trespassing because we can end up like Colton Bushi. So everywhere we go, we never receive justice. And that's tough. And I'm not sure when society makes that shift to be like, okay, actually you shouldn't be shooting people and then trying to cover it up, and and you should lose your license for mistreating an Indigenous woman. And they just assumed that she was a drug addict. She wasn't, right? She was having other issues, and I think they gave her the wrong medication, which is what led to her death. And she was saying that I'm allergic to this medication. Please don't give it to me. I mean, I didn't read the coroner's report, but the coroner said that, it was the hospital's fault that she died. But, it's hard when you live in a province that, doesn't recognize systemic racism, that doesn't really acknowledge what happened, but just to sort of put in the perspective that, well, it's only a couple of bad apples, so everything is fine. And then
of course, Quebec uses their own. I'm not pissing on their past grievances, but Quebec uses their own victimhood when they were discriminated against by by Anglophobe Canada to say that like there's no possible way that we ourselves can participate in anti-Indigenous, anti-Black, and xenophobic racism. So yeah.
Yeah, and now, with, especially in Quebec, there's the, Bill 96, where we're not allowed to speak, our language. And Indigenous people are like, we know about this. Yes, sent us to residential school. We weren't allowed to speak our language. That wasn't very helpful. And now you go to residential, most of the residential schools were English. So if we're forced to go to these schools and learn English, and now in Quebec, we're only allowed to speak French, that's a problem. But at least, the chief for the Grand Chief in Ganawage is fighting that. She just went to court yesterday to fight Bill 96. So the problem is in Quebec, before Bill 96, we were still suffering with not receiving services in the language of our choice. So if you call like the 911 operator or, an ambulance comes, they can talk to you in French the whole time. Before Bill 96, they still wouldn't change to English. So this is just
even though Quebec, I mean, and I say this as a compliment to Quebec, even though Quebec actually does practice being bilingual, because most Quebecers speak both French and English compared to most Canadians who only speak English, apart from the few good apples who do go to Quebec to live their lives, right?
There are certain people though in certain fields that refuse to speak English. They only want to speak French, and they expect you to speak it. And we've seen this time and time again, through even non-Indigenous people that are having these issues, with ambulances and trying to understand what the problem is and only being spoken in French, and they don't speak the language. It is, when you're in a crisis, you need to understand what's going on. Now, God forbid we should have any kind of crisis, because we're and it's like, I think that when you have to make that 911 call, you might just gamble and be like, oh, forget it. I'm not even going to try, because I've already received enough of this, discrimination. For sure, with this bill coming in, I'm only going to receive more. I'll just take my chances, and people will die. So yeah, it's pretty much an ongoing drama saga here. And I know that the bill is supposed to respect those Indigenous people that speak English, but I think that that 911 operator, whoever, is not going to be reading that part of the bill, and just I mean, honestly, at the Native Women's Shelter, we had two nurses that were student nurses that both spoke French, accompany an Indigenous woman to the hospital. She needed to have some kind of rape exam, and the nurse or the doctor refused the help of the two nurses to accompany her and to do the translation on her behalf. They still threw her out of the hospital. So this is what I'm saying. Even if you have two nurses that are willing to do the translation, you still get, rejected from the hospital because the Indigenous woman doesn't speak English. And there's not very many hospitals that will do that kind of test. So, that person walks away feeling really depleted, but the nurses actually spoke out about it recently to the media. So I'm glad about that, because people think it doesn't happen, that what happened to Joyce or whatever, it doesn't happen anymore, but it is an ongoing issue. And unless we have cameras all the time that are on to record these incidents, you think it doesn't happen. I literally had to tell the nurses that work with the shelter, when you go and do, an escort, be sure to have someone in the position to turn their phones on so that they can record what's going on. You should think of that before, because what happens is you're almost deer in the headlights. You're like, I can't believe what I just saw. Did anyone record that? No, because you're in shock. Know it's going to be rough. Have your camera ready and record it. It's the sad world, man. Anyway.
But at the same time, I mean, what's so striking about the fact that that these cackling racist dingbats who got to keep their jobs in Quebec. I remember when I first interviewed you several months ago, and we talked about that racist incident of Joyce. You said that at that very same hospital, barely like 3 months after people were protesting, weren't like the people on the staff saying to Indigenous patients, "Oh, we're going to treat you the way we treated Joyce Echaquan," right?
Yeah, it's exactly what happened. So, there's the hospital is supposed to go through some sensitivity training. I know that, the Atikamekw Nation, the community of Manwan, they're the ones that are closest, and that's where Joyce was a member. They're involved and they feel like there is progress. So, okay. I mean, that's what they see. If they see progress, we'll have to take their word for it. But, reinstating someone who did such horrible things, she should be looking for a new career. Like maybe she should be handing up parking tickets. Like maybe there's something else that suits her better, because,
Or she could go to hell. That'd be fine by me as well. So.
Well.
Yeah. Unbelievable. But then, it's funny. I actually didn't have a question prepared about the language bill, but actually, let's talk about the language bill, because I remember talking with my friend Eve Engler, who's been on the program many times, and Eve was saying that he doesn't see a problem with Quebec, provincial government strengthening, French laws, because it is a French-speaking province. So, being said, why, do you think, Indigenous people particularly are taking issue with stricter language laws, and and explain that dynamic? Because I would have assumed that Indigenous Quebecers basically speak French fluently as well as English fluently, but yeah, do demystify all of that for naive people like myself.
Okay, well, the thing is that Quebec is made up of 11 different nations, right?
11 different Indigenous nations.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So there are certain nations that that do speak French as well as their Indigenous language, like the Atikamekw, like the Innu, depending on where their territory is. Huron-Wendat. There are some that are very, for whatever reason, after the years of colonialism, their neighbors were French. They just picked up the French language. But there's also a lot of Indigenous nations that are English speaking. And I actually sit on a coalition of English speaking First Nations of Quebec. And it's, it's the Gitigan Zibi. There's a representative from there. There's a representative from, from Gunawage, from Gunawsatage, from there's a whole group of English speaking nations. Listugush is on there, the Mi'kmaq community. So these are communities that have always been speaking their Indigenous language and English. And now they have to forget about learning their Indigenous language and now have 6 months to learn French. That is not fair. So why aren't they? The thing is that, there are language speakers there are certain communities that they only have 2 or 3 language speakers left. Like our language is dying out. That's what residential schools did to us. And we are in sort of a process of relearning our language. So our focus should be about relearning our Indigenous language, not putting it aside and learning French. And for me, and I hope this doesn't get me into trouble, but the French people here in Quebec, should they lose their language, they can go back to France and relearn it, because they got a country where they came from. The Indigenous people here are not in that.
That is a controversial statement, but yes.
But it's true. Go back to your motherland. relearn it, you know? But we don't have that luxury because this is our land. We barely have anything left of it. We have tiny little communities forced to go to residential school, forced to learn English language, trying to keep our Indigenous language, and being thrown, hey, forget it, all that, you got to learn French. So a lot of the nations are fighting it. Like I said, the chief deer from Ganawage, Gasawahane deer, she's asking Legault for a meeting, the premier of Quebec. She asked for that like 2 months ago. Let's talk about this. He refuses to meet with her. So she's saying she won't be doing any business with the province until they meet. And I'm standing with her. So I am not doing any business with the province, because what I'm afraid of is that the government is going to try to conquer and divide us. Because when the chief made that message, I will no longer do business with Quebec until we sit down at the same table and have a discussion about this. The Secretary des Affaires Autochtones, which is a funding, it's a government that it's the Quebec government's funding agency for Indigenous people. They invited all the Indigenous nations to a meeting. I was like, did you not just hear? She said, nobody go to a meeting. Why are you inviting me? I'm not going. She just told me not to go. I'm not going to no meeting. So I had to let him know, because it's Ian Lafreniere, who's the minister of the Secretary des Affaires Autochtones. I said, listen, I can't go to no meeting until, you tell your boss to have a meeting with the chief. And if I have to do business, I send someone else to go, someone who's non-Indigenous. If there's something that needs to be done, we still have to get business done, but I'm not coming to your table.
But Ms. Nakuset, what would you say to supporters of the current provincial government, Coalition Avenue de Quebec, and to, I guess, some of his supporters in the Quebec Bloc and Parti Québécois and other, Quebec, nationalists and Quebec sovereigntists who say that, like, hey, we completely understand that Canada did you wrong, that our Catholic Church did you wrong, but this is a French-speaking province, and you do have to learn the language of this province so that we can communicate better with you. And if you don't like it, well, hey, Canada is grand. There's so many other places where you don't have these language barriers. What would you say to those? What would you say to those Quebecers?
The thing is that the people that live in the communities are rich in their resources, right? You're going to tell the Crees to get out, forget your Hydro-Quebec there. Like, they're the ones the dam is on. There are so many things that, if we decide to just sort of rise up, that they're going to be shaking. So all we're saying is respect our rights. Y'all want to learn French? Go for it. But we are Indigenous people. It is our right to speak our language. We want to learn our Indigenous language. We prefer to speak English. Respect that. Why don't you learn some English? As a matter of fact, you should all learn Mohawk, because that you're on Mohawk territory, right? Like, ooh.
Yeah, exactly. Well, okay. Well, jeez, I got Miss Nakuset on fire. Who else can do that on a on the show? All right. Well, then changing subject for a bit. I have to ask you, because we were talking about this a little bit off the air. I wanted your reflections then on the historic visits of survivors and descendants of the residential schools to the Vatican and vice versa. Pope Francis, who on some issues, certainly in the rhetoric and on the surface, he seems much more progressive than previous popes before him, and certainly more than the Opus Dei school of thought. And I just wanted, So what was your reflections on that, and what on your reflections, and what was your reflections on him coming to Canada to meet residential descendants and school survivors? What are your reflections? And please feel free, Be honest about them. Be honest and be honest when I ask you, do you share the anger that I had when Indigenous leaders gave him a traditional head covering?
Yeah. Where do I start? Okay. So, I mean, everyone knew that the Pope was coming. What I found really interesting was this Catholic group reached out to me, and they said, when the Pope comes to give a speech, we're going to have, we're going to watch it in the church with our community. Would you like to join us? Why would I sit with you? Like, what? For what reason? Because he gives an apology and they're going to turn and look at me and go, see, it's over. He gave an apology. Get over it. Now, the thing is that my mother went to residential school, right? So she suffered at these schools. Now, she is an Anglican. So when the Pope did his first apology, because he did many, right? So on that first day in Calgary, he said something about this apology should be from all Christians. So not just the Catholics, but, the Anglicans and everyone else that,
exactly
were in the residential schools. But I think that, he has a really good script writer. So he writes things that are, sort of politically correct. But I know that most people, when you give an apology, you have to show some kind of way to show you that you're sorry. Like if I have a fight with my boyfriend, he's going to bring me some flowers. Like what did the Pope bring? He brought nothing. And I think that we're talking about these mass graves. And I think he could have brought a list of, here's the list of priests that were involved in the mass graves. And, and here's a list of the children. We have their names. That would have been something. That would have been a start, but that was not offered. There was no money being offered in terms of anything. It was just, we feel for you guys. And I know that, some people actually went to hear the apology, and that it was focused to the survivors. Now, I am not a survivor. I'm intergenerationally affected. And most of the women that come to the Native Women's Shelter are in the same boat, so they're not survivors. So if you think
but that being said, sorry to interrupt. But that being said, you're as much a victim of the residential schools as the direct victims because of intergenerational traumas, and because of the fact that it was the model of other grotesque apartheid policies, such as yours truly, scoop scandal and whatnot. And
yeah. So I mean, to sort of break it down a little bit, because my mother went to residential school, all 7 of us were split and put into different foster homes. I was being adopted. If there were no residential schools, then I would be, in my community. I would be, back in Lac La Ronge. My sister ended up committing suicide because of everything that she had been through. This is intergenerational trauma. The people that are on the streets right now are intergenerationally traumatized. We have a large Inuit population, and most of the residential schools, when they built them, they would go to the communities, take the children and bring them to like a different province. Like in Montreal, in Ganawage, a lot of the kids in Ganawage went to the residential school called Spanish in Ontario. And that was because if they tried to run away, it's a long way back, right? So they were really trying. But the Inuit communities, they built the schools in the communities. There was no escaping. Everyone went. And in Montreal, one of the largest homeless population is the Inuit. So they're not the ones that are going to listen to this Pope's apology. And yet, what are the churches doing to support the population, right? So, I mean, through Resilience Montreal, we wrote a very strong letter to all the churches saying, well, I'm sure you heard what the Pope had to say. And if you really want to help support an organization that is helping a population that is so traumatized from residential school, find a way to support us, either through money or through, offering some kind of skill set or volunteering or doing a food drive. All these churches, if you really want to commit to the Pope's vision, then help us, because we are doing the work. And you are the ones that are walk by really quickly when you see homeless people. Don't give them any eye contact and hold on to your bag. And, instead of treating people that way, be Christ-like. That's a thing, and help the population. So anyways, we're waiting for the churches, like we wrote to 70 churches. We're waiting for someone to get back to us, but that's what happens. The Pope leaves, everybody thinks it's fine. Now, the gift. The headdress that was given to the Pope. It was given by Crees, not my community. It was a different community. And apparently, the Crees felt that this was the right thing to do because it was a thing of forgiveness and also for a dialogue and that this in their minds was the right thing to do. So you can't fault that. But I would not have done it. I would have given him a glass of water from Atikamekw and a Kent Monkman picture. The ones where the priests and the priests and nuns are ripping the children out of the mother's hands with the RCMP. That's what he should get and bring back to Rome, because that is the legacy of residential school. So, but yeah.
I mean, one thing I do love about Indigenous communities, but it's another thing where I wish that Indigenous communities had way more Russel Means, way more Malcolm X's, way more Robert Eggingsons. It's like, I love the fact that Indigenous people can rise above hatred, given all that's been given to them and given all that still goes on to them. But I have to say, I was quite pissed off about the Indigenous communities giving him the head thing, because it's like giving Stephen Harper that, it's like giving Justin Trudeau that, it's like giving every single scumbag Canadian Prime Minister who conserves the settler-colonialism and I'll say this, I have rewatched, many times Stephen Harper's apology to the residential schools and all of the opposition leaders' his apologies to the residential schools. I thought it was all very moving. I had an issue with Stephen Harper saying that some people had fun at residential schools, but that aside, what just gets me under my skin is that come on, guys. I mean, the injustices still continue in so many different ways. I mean, just when we talk about mass incarceration alone, where people say that that's the new residential schools, that's what gets me under my skin. And I just wish that that those Indigenous leaders who thought it was nice to give the Pope thing, it's like, oh, for F's sakes, have some effing dignity, man. Your thoughts on that?
Listen, I mean, you're talking to a Jewish Indian, right? So, I mean, I was taken away from the community. I was brought up in a different way. My understanding is that, it's a real honor to get a headdress. I don't know if, but
he doesn't deserve that honor.
I don't think he earned it.
He doesn't deserve that honor, because he doesn't deserve that honor. Sorry to interrupt again, because, I remember, reading an article by my friends at this Australian left-wing news outlet called New Matilda, and they cover a lot about the plight of Aboriginal people, the Indigenous people of Australia. And one of the journalists, I think it was Amy McQuire or somebody else, who, when talking about the stolen generation, they said, "Sorry is the easiest word, compensation is the hardest."
Yeah. Totally. And that's what's even, when you talked about Harper giving the apology, I was at the shelter that day. I've been at the shelter for 23 years now. So we saw that apology come. And then we saw something called the Aboriginal Healing Foundation, which was a foundation to help. And we applied for those monies. And then I think after 4 or 5 years, they cut the funding. So, that whole point about if we are in residential schools for over 100 years, that's how long these foundations should be around. Because healing doesn't happen right away. It takes time. And we're talking about intergenerational. So, there a lot of people that, are intergenerational, like their parents went, now they have kids in youth protection. It continues, like it's ongoing. And there's a lot of work. Those children are going to need funding to get them out of what was your experience like in foster care? Were you abused? What do you know about your culture? Like there's a lot of learning and help that they're going to need. So keep bringing that money forward. Like I like not impressed with the Pope's visit.
And I mean, at the same time, because of all of the trauma that not just residential schools, but just the entire settler-colonial project of Turtle Island, Australia, New Zealand, what the Sami people go through, what Indigenous Brazilians go through, what even Indigenous Africans, because we also have Indigenous people, we call them, the Bushmen and so forth. All of them, eradicated, their lands, stolen from them. And for me, like, when we talk about, residential schools and the intergenerational trauma, so you have people who later abused their own kids, who later fell into alcoholism, who later fell into drug addiction, who later fell into a life of crime. All of, the root of all that evil is, the dispossession of Indigenous people's lands, followed by the residential schools. That, I mean, if I was Prime Minister of Canada, if I was President of the United States or Prime Minister of Australia, New Zealand, or any place where the Indigenous people have been, dispossessed and pardon my language, treated like shit, anyone, who went to jail and why they went to jail was because of that intergenerational trauma, I would free them from that jail and say, you're pardoned. We're not getting any of that, right? We're not getting any of that. I don't even think the Pope is even talking about that. So your response to that?
Sorry, my response to what? You just went on like crazy. What was the question exactly? Why aren't the prime ministers pardoning Indigenous people? I don't know. I mean, the thing is that what's really damaging about the Pope coming is that it was the churches that decided that, we were, less than, and that was the conversation that led to the RCMP also, mistreating us, and also the hospitals and everything else. So they were the leaders in this, that we were savages and that we needed to be, sort of, scraped at the root and all that. And all the institutions bought into that, including the government. I think they need to acknowledge their biases, right? And they have to, make it's instead of the pardons, I think they should probably ask us, can you please make a wish list of all the things that we need to do? Because sometimes they have to ask us. Like, it's nice to be pardoned and coming out of jail, but does that mean you're in the streets? You're going to end up back in jail again. So, we know what the solutions are. Come and ask us, and we will show you. We will make you a map. This is what you need to do. This is the timeline. This is how long it's going to take. This is the money that we're expecting. Thank you very much. Not just a burden.
Yeah. And I mean, at the same time, and I remember asking you this question. I remember asking this to Indigenous people based in from Canada, Alexander Reed and Damien Gagon, and I've asked other Indigenous people this question, which is, why are so many people, why are so many Indigenous people incarcerated? Are all of them incarcerated because of the most, pettiest of things, or are many of them incarcerated because they have done, legitimate crimes where you go, whoa, okay, that person does need to go to jail, and they all say to me, oh, Indigenous people are in jail for basically being Indigenous, for being homeless and sleeping in the wrong place, for driving in the wrong place, for doing what other Canadians get to do, which is having a drunken for having a drunken good time, and when I hear that just shocks me, and I want your your reflections on that.
Well, I mean, it's true that we are racially profiled, right? So we're racially profiled everywhere we go, though. So if it's not by the police, I mean, I have a colleague that's Indigenous, that is well-educated, that was crossing the street with a group of people, and she was singled out and pushed by a cop and had to go to court because he mistreated her. Like, it's amazing. She's like, why about everyone else? Why am I the one who's targeted, right? So, but again, it's also this like historic thing where we have been targeted throughout the ages, and people need to sort of, change their mindsets. But, like youth protection, right? Like people going into the hospitals, you have a baby. If you're Indigenous, you have to be aware that, the nurses don't go and check that baby when you're not there, because otherwise they could be like, oh no, mom's Indigenous, she must be a drunk. Let's take this, child and put it in youth protection, right? That happens a lot. So, I mean, it's difficult, right? I mean, my son has a hat that says Cree on it. And when he sees a cop, he takes it off. He's like, no, okay. He's 9 years old, but he already knows that we get racial profiled. So the thing is that, if we don't put the sort of limitation or the expectation on society to change, how are they going to change? If people allow it, if the Pope comes and says an apology and doesn't give anything in return, then everyone says, well, it's fine, but it's not, because I mean, even like, even when you go to church in the confessionals and you do something bad, you still have to say Hail Marys. You still have to show the Pope showed nothing and everyone let him get away with it. And now it's just sort of like, back to business. Now everything's fine, but it's not, because people are continuing to suffer, and people were very, very, very triggered by him coming. Very triggered. And, though there were some people who felt it was, it was a good thing, that it was an apology they wanted to hear. And there's other people who were on the other fence. And then and it actually divided the community, because people, even the headdress, people were like, yeah, it's fine. They gave him a headdress. People are like, oh, come on. Why are you being so nice? And these are the things that, but at the end of the day, we still work with the population that is most affected by residential school. And I think that people need to step up and support. And that is something that we need to see. Like, that needs to be the mission now. You're, sort of like, got land, thanking Indian. Well, support those that don't have land, that don't get the privilege of going back to their community, that don't have houses in their community that were promised by the government, or clean water, or everything else. Like, to really understand what is going on and how can you help, because you are privileged to be here in Montreal. And, we're not asking for a lot, but, it doesn't have to be monetary. It could be just volunteering, supporting, kindness.
Well, I think it should be all of the above. Because the Holocaust that your people suffered, not just in Canada, but Australia, New Zealand, the United States of America, other Indigenous communities from Chile to Brazil to the Sami people of the Nordic countries. I mean, it's just one of those things where just giving people a basic civil rights that says, you're one of us, and you're a protector of the law. That's just not adequate when it comes to the justice that your people deserve. And yeah, I mean, it's just unbelievable. And that leads to
tell you something. There's
yeah.
People were sharing sometimes Native people use humor to sort of deal with the tension. And when they gave the Pope the headdress, someone wrote, "Now he's ready for Coachella." Yeah, what can I feel, right? It's just anyway. Sorry, moving on.
That'd be cool. Yeah, but that'd be like petty cultural, appropriation. All right, enough about that awful institution, which is the Vatican. On to this question. So, apparently, on this special day for Indigenous people, the theme of today is the let me read this because it's quite a mouthful. The role of Indigenous women in the preservation and transmission of traditional knowledge. So that being said, is there any Indigenous feminist from the way past before colonization happened you'd like Indigenous and non-Indigenous people to explore, and any one of the present day who inspires you that folks should check out?
Okay, so I mean, when I think of an empowering woman from the past, I would say Mary 2X Early.
Okay.
So Mary 2X Early was a Mohawk woman from Gunawaga that fell in love with an Irish guy and married him and was thrown off the reservation because of the blood quantum, because the government said that if an Indigenous
and to explain people that disgusting eugenics policy.
Yeah. So when an Indigenous woman marries a white man, she loses her Indian status. She has to leave the reservation, and none of her children get her Indian status. But if an Indigenous man marries a white woman, she becomes an Indian, and all of her children have their Indian status. And even if she has white children that she brought into the marriage, they become Indians. So this happened, to Mary 2X Early. And when her husband passed away, she was living in New York City, so she wasn't really thinking too much about it. But when she came back after her husband passed away, back to Gunawaga, they didn't allow her in. They were like, sorry. And she was like, but wait a minute. I see all these, Native guys marrying white women. They're on the reservation. This is discrimination. I got to fight it. And she spent 20 years fighting it. And the law that was changed was called Bill C-31. And I knew Mary 2X Early because I was dating her grandson back in the day. And she was my role model. And when she told me how long it took her to fight, I said, well, I'm going to go and get an education. I want to be like you. Haven't changed the law yet, but I still got time, right? So she's definitely a role model. And this was Canada-wide. So anyone that, can apply for Bill C-31 and get their Indian status back. Like my mom, she married, I don't know who she married, but she was with some white men. So I fell into that as well. I'm considered a Bill C-31 Indian. Yes, they still call us Indians. It's on our status. I know I use that word a lot, but again, that's how the government at the end of the day looks at us. Still called, the Indian Act that we fall under. It's not called the Indigenous Act or the Aboriginal Act. They call it the Indian Act. So
one of the greatest people power movements is still called the American Indian Movement, and boy, do I have a very hard time saying that.
I don't mind. It doesn't bother me, but anyway, it might bother other people, but I'm fine being called like a Jewish Indian. It's what I am. And I would say that, someone that's still around is, Ellen Gabriel. I think she's just amazing, and I've known her. Yeah, she's from Gunasatawge, and she's really well known during the Oka crisis because she was, it was the chiefs that decided, and the clan mothers decided that she would be the spokesperson, and she was so young, but she had to be the spokesperson throughout that and was fighting for, the fact that the town wanted to turn the graveyards into a golf course, right? So they fought against that, and that graveyard is still there. But she got a lot of, like, it was a very, very difficult time for the community. I don't know if it's fully 100% healed, but I know that she has been an activist and is the strongest speaker I've ever met. Like when I did the rally for Joyce Echaquan, Ellen Gabriel was there. She is always by far the best speaker. So much so nobody wants to speak after her because it's like, yeah, no one's listening. Ellen said it, right? And I really enjoy working with her when I can, and like September 30th in Canada is called Truth and Reconciliation Day, the National Truth and Reconciliation Day. And what's hard is that, the government says, I'm giving this as a holiday because I'm acknowledging you guys. Now, first of all, why would you acknowledge a day that is really synonymous with residential school? That's nothing to celebrate about, but whatever. But you have a premier of Quebec that refuses to acknowledge this day because we have already too many holidays. And you have, Trudeau that decided to go on vacation. So when you have, the top prime minister and then the premier both ignoring this day, it's very difficult for Indigenous people to have some kind of pride. But I did a march last year for September 30th, and I'm doing another one this year. And I'm going to ask people to come out. Like, if you support Indigenous people, then you show us. You show up in numbers. These mass graves, they're still being found. I know the Cree community is now in the process, of doing their own radar search. So, it gets really difficult to be Indigenous, and it doesn't ever feel like it's getting easier, but we need to get as many tools as we can because it's almost like a tsunami. It's like we see, the grief is coming. There's always more issues. I mean, and we have to be prepared for what is going to happen next. But I think that society also needs to be with us. So for September 30th, we want the schools to come out, to actually meet survivors, to see, what it's like to be, with the different incredible speakers that I always bring forward, because they're the ones that are sharing the knowledge, the words that the kids need to hear. It's not what they're going to learn in the schools, right? It's like a really great opportunity, and it's for people to advocate in a safe, proactive manner. So, yeah. Anyway. Sorry.
And and that's a perfect segue to this question, seeing as we're talking about, seeing as we're celebrating Indigenous women on this special Indigenous Peoples Day, which is, explain to people not from Canada, what was the Idle No More movement and the solidarity shown from several years ago during the Conservative Party era of Stephen Harper?
I am not that involved with Idle No More, but I believe it started out from like 3 different women, I believe from Vancouver, that basically wanted to do something to show that we are not just sitting around anymore, that we need to do something proactive. And I think that they would do round dances and do like flash mobs at malls and stuff like that. It would bring people's attention. And then also have time to share about, their realities, what is going on and why you should be paying attention to it. And I know that, it inspired other Indigenous people throughout, Canada to do something, right? So, I mean, I know they do have a chapter here in Montreal for Idle No More. I don't sit on it, but I don't sit at all. I'm always doing something, so I find my own way to bring awareness. Huh?
But I was just about to say, sorry to interrupt, but isn't it safe to say that Idle No More was like the first, I guess you could call it like a kind of an eco-socialist and Indigenous feminist sort of sort of organization, and And I don't know what it was. Maybe it's because people were suffering from, Harper derangement, derangement syndrome. But there was something about I Don't Know More where all of a sudden everybody was learning about Indigenous issues. And Canadians were starting to understand that just like America, Australia, New Zealand, we are a settler colonial country, and how dare we continue to have this when we're supposed to be Canada and so forth like that. Yeah. So it's insane to say like I Don't Know More helped not only just Canada's environmental movement, but when we talk about the Red Power movement, I Don't Know More was more or less an extension of what I broadly call Native Lives Matter, Indigenous Lives Matter movements, specifically in Canada, though, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was an awakening, and everyone that did their own event for I Don't Know More had a different message depending on what was going on in their area. I mean, I remember the I Don't Know More group even went to Ottawa when that chief, I believe, from Gitigan Zibi was going on a hunger strike, right? Like they went to support her in this because of what was going on in her community. It's like, a lot of Indigenous communities are living like third world conditions and nothing ever happens. Nothing ever changes. And sometimes we need to sort of step up and be seen. And I think that, by doing it as a round dance in terms of, having people sing and join together, it brought attention in a way where we didn't get shot. You know what I'm saying? Like you got to find your ways on bringing awareness in a safe manner. But I think that everyone was like, yes, I identify with this movement. I will be there. If someone is doing something in my area, let's do it. And often, like when events do happen, you will see like a banner that says, I Don't Know More. You'll still see that people, bring it. It's really,
what
it's like
what Black Lives Matter was for America.
Yeah.
That was basically I Don't Know More in Canada, safe to say, right?
Yeah. I believe so. I mean, I think the Black Lives Matter had more to do with the amount of Black people that were killed by cops, right? We all got killed anyway. Sorry, but like
it's true.
It's been an ongoing issue for us since the RCMP brought the rifles and we hunted bow and arrows. But anyway, but I think that it was a little bit more of a social political push about the way things are. And I mean, that's what it is. And it really ignited, and other people did other things and felt brave because others were doing it. So it was inspirational.
And before I go to these two final questions, any reflections on a certain Indigenous woman from Canada who's unapologetically outspoken? I know you and her probably have disagreements when it comes to abolition of the police, but you're both my sheroes and heroines. Pamela Palmater. Reflections on reflections on her.
I'm not exactly like I met Pam maybe, oh God, like maybe 20 years ago at Concordia, but I know that she's referred to often in the media, that is always someone who brings like a strong voice to Indigenous issues, that is like incredibly educated. She's on the right path. We don't really mix in the same, like she's more of a political. I like to say I'm not political. People think I am. I'm not. I'm just trying to support, Indigenous women, children, and those that are homeless, right? But I'm not someone that is in really the same field as her. But I mean, she does amazing work. I don't really know her. But what is she wants to like abolish the police?
Yeah. She's an abolitionist. Wants to abolish the police.
Do you think I don't want to abolish the police?
Well, the last time I talked to you about that, you were definitely much more of a reformist of the police as opposed to abolishing the police.
It's true. It's true.
Whereas she and my whereas she and my dear friend, frequent guest on this show, L. Jones, is for abolishing the police. Whereas
I don't think I think that you need the police. Like if I'm being murdered, I'm not going to call a social worker. I need the police. There are times where they have to come in and be there, but they also definitely need to be reformed. Like I don't see them ever leaving. Like I don't think it's realistic to think that they're suddenly going to abolish the police. I think that there's, they need to be sort of I don't know, reset. That they need to learn from like the tribal police that they have in all the communities to get their learnings there. They need to change and the same thing with the RCMP and all that. Like they're a system that's broken. And maybe that's why she feels it needs to be abolished, because it's broken. But I don't know.
Somebody like Pamela Palmater, L. Jones, and others who are very much on the abolitionist school of thought, including Miriam Haddad, who was a Green Party candidate for the leadership. Who, Miss Haddad, if you're watching this, please come on the program. We'd love to interview you. They would say that the RCMP were founded to be the racist thugs they were, the state terrorists they were, and that there is no reforming them. Me, let's just say I'm much more agnostic on the issue. I used to be of the opinion that, we just need to radically reform the system, get rid of the drug war, stop militarizing the police. But I am open to the idea of abolitionism, but I'm just not on that page yet because of past conversations I've had with you where there are just times where the police are a necessary evil. Like I said, I'm open to the idea of abolishing the police, but I'm just not on that. Point where, yes, I am for. Yeah, yada yada yada.
Well, I mean, the thing is that I just want to say two things about that. One, why can't they have a bias test before they become an RCMP? That would really root out a lot of people if you had a bias test. And I have a colleague, one of my staff who was the mediator for the Cabot Square project. She worked with the homeless Indigenous people, super kind, wonderful woman. She left us to go work for the RCMP. And I remember saying, remember not to shoot Indians, wow. But, there are people that join for a good reason. That's what we need to attract. You need to sort of, when I say like reform, you got to kind of be like, okay, you need to retire. You and that nurse that mistreated Joyce Echaquan, y'all need to retire. You need to take a bias test. You need to do an exam in front of a group of elders to show that you're really not biased. They will show you, they will figure out whether or not.
Need to go to hell.
Well, they need to have proper testing by the Indigenous community to see whether or not they pass. There are a lot of Indigenous police, like the tribal police. There's a lot of people that join that field. So I don't think they're doing it in a way that they want to, mistreat their own community members. There's a way that it can be done. But I think that, the system is a little bit screwed. They need to sort of switch it and remember why they're there and have different kinds of training and bring in all new recruits and vet them. You suck. You're not, you're going to give out tickets. That's your job. I don't know. And I'm talking about parking tickets. Not talking about.
Yeah, and I just have to say about Miss Miss Palmater. I think just like Selena Egginson, who I've interviewed on this program before, who helps with her husband run the Dunbar Tongue Aboriginal Corporation, the Kayana Healing Center. Somebody like her, somebody like yourself, and somebody like Pamela Palmater, and somebody like Tara Haska, in the U.S. and with Leduc. my heroes and my heroines and my sheroes. So I just have to mention mention that, and hopefully I can get her on the program and you on the program in the future to talk about where the movement goes and have this much needed debate on police abolitionism or reformism. But my second to final question I wanted to ask you was, how was the month of Pride celebration in the Indigenous community, where I believe members of the queer community in the LGBTQIA, when they're Indigenous, they're called Two-Spirit in Canada. So those who recognize Indigenous communities, elsewhere in settler colonial imperial states, it's I believe it's LGBTQIA to S plus, right or not?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so all right. So if you have any Two-Spirit friends, how did they enjoy themselves? And I'm sure some are probably happy to be recognized as part of the queer community in wider society now. And yeah, your thoughts on that.
I mean, every community, like historically, Indigenous communities had, like there's different roles in the community, and Two-Spirited was a recognized role. That there's empowerment in being Two-Spirited. So I mean, the community here is quite strong. There was supposed to be a Pride parade last weekend that was canceled.
Unfortunately.
I don't know if you heard about that, but it's like the talk of the town now because there's no reason why it should have been.
Yeah, claiming that they couldn't get enough security, all sorts of weird.
I don't get it. I don't get it. I mean, I had probably 10,000 people that came when we did the July 1st for Every Child Matters. I had no security. I had a group of volunteers, maybe 15 or 20. Everything was fine. I was like, but I mean, credit to the, the community that people still went out and, had made their own parade without anything, right? But I think that, it's thriving here in Montreal, that it's known as one of the, communities that is the most, embracing, the queer culture. And, I don't know what else to say.
So Two-Spirit, in case people don't know. So is it safe to say when an Indigenous person describes themselves as Two-Spirit, does that basically mean that they're part of any community of like the queer community, or what exactly is?
I mean, yeah, you'd want to speak to someone like Diane Reed from Gunawage, who is Two-Spirited and talks about it. I'm heterosexual, so I have limited knowledge, but I think
same with me, yeah.
But someone who's Two-Spirited is actually recognizing that they have male and female energy, right? And that there's a reason for that, and that it's considered a gift. But yeah, I would definitely, if you need Diane's email, and invite her to guest. She does a lot of public speaking about it. She's a fantastic public speaker. So
perfect.
I'd rather you have like an expert on it than me, because I'm like,
no problem. And then all right, well then my last question, my last question, Miss Nakuset, is this. Now before I ask this question, I'm going to say this though. Now, I often get quite depressed about the state of Indigenous affairs in the U.S. from the mainland to Hawaii and Alaska, and I get even more depressed when I observe the state of affairs for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in Australia, in which you still have the history wars raging. You still have white supremacist academics and people in the media who say there was no genocide of Aboriginal people, and even if there was, their culture was obsolete, and we gave them capitalism, so they should be grateful. And then when I look at the state of Indigenous people in the Amazons, Brazil, and then the Sami people, and their human rights abuses, and their quest for a better today and tomorrow is so criminally overlooked. And much of the left, even the best of the left, that are anti-imperialist and their social justice, racial justice, people power movements, it's not even up on their radar on the top 5 campaigns that's keeping them up on nights. So if we took, the U.S. alone, what will it take for the Native Lives Matter, Red Power movements, the American Idol No More movement? What will it take for, the largely white Marxist left, socialist reformist left, Black Lives Matter, Latinx Lives Matter, queer liberationist feminists, and the anti-imperialist movement and the eco-socialist movement to rally in defense of Indigenous people? Because, and this is the final thing I'll say before I get your reaction, John, Pilger, who's my hero, he once said about Aboriginal people in Australia, he said, nothing will change until we right the wrongs of the bloody past. And like apartheid South Africa, reconciliation is not possible without justice. And until we give them back, i.e. Indigenous people, their nationhood, we can never claim our own. And I would just say that we can't call ourselves a multiracial melting pot society because our victories are only half won. So I just wanted your reaction on that.
Thanks. That's a great last question. I mean, it's not an easy question, but the only thing that comes to mind is, the leaders, all the presidents, all the mayors, all the people that are in a position of power need to be giving this message, right? Because like I had said before, when we had the National Truth and Reconciliation Day and Justin went on vacation and Legault didn't think it was important, everyone follows suit. If you have a prime minister that says, you need to be more, I don't know what, to Indigenous people. It's a big list, so I don't know where to start, right? But you need to learn the education. People need to have justice. You need to be accountable. You need to be kind. You need to understand. You can go to different provinces like Vancouver, and they offer an Indigenous language in the elementary schools, right? You can go to like a museum. You can go to an airport in BC and have all kinds of Indigenous art. And then you can go to Montreal, where it's like we don't exist. So by having the all the different leaders forcing or sharing the knowledge and the best practices and acknowledging what has gone on. I mean, that's why there were mass graves. Nobody wanted to acknowledge it. They wanted to hide it. The government isn't saying.
Well, but then, sorry to interrupt, but I'll rephrase my question. I mean, basically, what I'm asking is, when is it going to take? What will it take for basically the I Don't Know More movement, Native Lives Matter, Red Power movements in the U.S. or Australia and similar countries to get to the level your people are at in Canada, where, look, things are not hunky-dory.
No, I'm sorry.
Things are not hunky-dory, but at least it's in the consciousness of people. At least the media is forced to cover it, and at least your left in Canada acknowledges that all the roots of all the evil that we're trying to, fight against, it all starts with Indigenous people. And until, as John Pilger says, until we right the wrongs of the bloody past, until we give them back their nationhood, we can never claim our own. And anything that we do, any victory we do, workers' rights, feminism, Black Lives Matter is only half won. So,
for me, again, it has to come from the government, because I don't feel like we've really accomplished that much in Canada, right? We're still getting shot at. We're still getting abused in hospitals. Where our children are still being, overrepresented in youth protection. We're still the highest population in jail. I don't see that we're a shining example. Yes, there are more people that are trying to make an effort, but we're just individuals. So it is the government's responsibility that if you take this position in government, then this is the priority should be Indigenous people, and this is the message that is going to trickle down, and people are going to have to abide by it. That, you know, National Truth and Reconciliation Day is a legal holiday, and everyone hand out subpoenas to all the people that, you know, started digging the graves that, you know, for those mass graves. Like, there needs to be some kind of justice and accountability. But like I said, Justin Trudeau, when he heard about the mass graves, is like, oh, we'll just give you some money. We'll give you some money so you can do healing. It's like, no. We want to know everyone who was involved in this. If they did it for, like, for the concentration camps, you know, when they had the Nuremberg trials, that's what we need in Canada. And we need to rechange or rewrite the history books. That's what we need it from the government, because people are always looking to their leaders. It's like, well, my leader doesn't care, so I don't have to care. Well, no, you're going to have to care now. Anyway, that was my last question, right?
And what would you say to Indigenous people in, you know, Australia or Brazil or Chile, or the Sami people, or yours truly, the other part of Turtle Island, the United States, you know, who are, you know, depressed and sick and think that things are never get better? What would you say to those people? And if you could use a Canadian example, that, hey, you can at least fight with some dignity and do your head up high, what would you say to those Indigenous folk?
I mean, it's hard. It's always hard. It's not going to necessarily get easier, but I think that, every person has a purpose, and you need to find those that are going to help you move forward. You're going to have to find people that are going to help you to sort of realize, you know, what your calling is. Right? Not everyone wants to be like me and run like 2 organizations and start multiple programs and all. Like, not everyone could do that, right? But what is your purpose here as an Indigenous person? Is it to, you know, revitalize the language? Is it to write, you know, legends? Is it to, you know, work with the children, to, you know, work with youth protection, like, you know, work with the jails, to reform the police? The list is on. Like, you can do it. And I think that, you know, we are resilient as an Indigenous people. Like, the government did everything to try to kill us with the smallpox and the blankets. And like, they did everything, and we're still here. So I think that you have to be like, you know, acknowledge on this day that we are still here and we're not going anywhere. And, you know, find others of like mind and find mentors. And, you know, you only have one chance at this life. So you got to knock it out of the ballpark. And try to bring hope for that next generation in whatever it is that you're doing.
But in that said, in closing, isn't it up to us? When I say us, I'm talking about my Black community, my, you know, straight cisgender community. Isn't it really up to all of them who to also break their silence, stop being innocent bystanders, and speak up for Indigenous people, and say, and say to whatever you want to call it, the capitalist system, white supremacy, settler-colonialism, imperialism? Is it also up to us to also, you know, just, you know, show solidarity to Indigenous people and say, enough of this ghastly, grotesque system?
I mean, whatever is in your comfort zone. Not everyone wants to do that, but you can sort of align yourself with an Indigenous organization, help out where you can. And if you see someone who's homeless on the street, you can be kind, because you're like, I know what you've been through and it's been rough. And, you know, here's a gift card for McDonald's or whatever, you know, like, kindness really matters, right? And not everyone is able to sort of, you know, change the government or try to get the government to change, because God knows they're not going to change. But, you know, work with the people. And, you know, like I said, you're only here for like a short time on this earth. So, you know, how are you going to use your humanity to help others? Find that way. And, you know, us Indigenous people, we're just awesome. And we're so funny. So starting up the conversation with one of us.
All right. Well, I think that's probably a good place to end it. So we were joined on this edition of 1+1. This was our Native Indigenous Lives Matter episode, also our All Things Canada episode. And again, what a great day to be recording this episode, which was long in the making because it's International Day of it's International Day of the world's Indigenous people. The theme was the role of Indigenous women in the preservation and transmission of traditional society, and we had Mrs. Nakuset for that. So on that note, Miss Nakuset, first of all, before I stop recording, thank you so much for coming today, for coming at complete last minute. It was an honor to have you. Hope to have you back on again in the future. And I don't know what I can say. I think all I can say is, power to the people, death to settler-colonialism, power to the people, death to white supremacy, Native Lives Matter, and as John Pilger said, nothing's going to change until we right the wrongs of the bloody past, and until we give Indigenous people back their nationhood, we can never claim our own. And I think it's of the utmost importance for the Black diaspora anywhere to show solidarity to Indigenous people. And boy, oh boy, just if I take Canada alone, that kind of solidarity that Black Lives Matter and Indigenous people show one another is just, effing beautiful. And I hope that happens in the United States and elsewhere. So, yeah.
All right.
So thank you so much. And so thank you so much. And yes, again, everybody, power to the people.
All right. So